Sergeant Cole Morrison stood at the edge of his front lawn, his duffel bag weighing heavy on his shoulder. 27 months. That's how long he'd been gone. First deployed to Afghanistan, then held captive in a makeshift prison for 8 grueling months before the rescue operation finally found him. The white colonial house with its red shutters looked exactly the same, but something felt different. Wrong. The October evening air carried the scent of burning leaves, a smell that once meant home. Now it just reminded him of the fires his captors would build to warm themselves while he shivered in his concrete cell. Cole's jaw tightened as he approached the front door, his military bearing intact despite the hell he'd endured. He'd lost 30 pounds during captivity, his once muscular frame now lean and sharp like a blade. His dark hair had grown shaggy, and a scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, a gift from his captors' daily interrogations. But his gray eyes remained as cold and calculating as ever, perhaps more so now. Cole didn't knock. This was his house, bought and paid for with his combat pay and savings. He turned the key and stepped inside, expecting to see Diana run to him like in the movies. Instead, he heard laughter from upstairs, his wife's laugh, followed by a deeper male voice. His blood turned to ice. Cole set down his bag silently, his special forces training kicking in. Every movement was calculated, soundless. He climbed the stairs like a ghost, following the voices to his bedroom. The door was ajar, and through the crack, he saw everything. Diana, his wife of 4 years, was in bed with a man Cole didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and soft-looking, with perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails. Everything Cole wasn't. They were discussing something in hushed tones, intimate and comfortable in a way that spoke of long familiarity. "When are you going to tell him about us?" the man asked, running his fingers through Diana's auburn hair. "Soon, Rick. I promise. I just need to figure out the best way to handle the financial situation first. His military benefits, the house, there's a lot at stake." Cole's fists clenched. He'd spent months in hell, dreaming of coming home to his wife, and here she was planning to divorce him for money while cheating on him in their marriage bed. What if he doesn't come back at all? Rick continued. "They declared him MIA. Maybe we should just—" "Shoo," Diana interrupted. "Don't say things like that. But if something did happen, well, I'd inherit everything as his widow." Cole had heard enough. He backed away from the door, his mind already working. 20 years of military service had taught him patience, strategy, and most importantly, how to destroy his enemies completely. Diana and her lover had just declared war on the wrong soldier. He slipped back downstairs and out the front door, retrieving his duffel bag. He would return later, but first, he needed time to think. Time to plan. In the military, they called it reconnaissance, gathering intelligence before striking. Cole Morrison had survived torture and captivity by never showing his hand too early. As he walked away from the house, Cole's mind was already 3 steps ahead. Diana thought she was playing a game with a missing soldier. She had no idea she'd just started a war with a trained killer who'd learned that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Chapter 2. The Players. Diana Morrison sat at her vanity, applying lipstick with practiced precision. At 28, she was still beautiful, the kind of beauty that turned heads and opened wallets. Auburn hair fell in waves past her shoulders, framing green eyes that could look innocent or seductive depending on her needs. She'd married Cole when she was 24, drawn to his steady military paycheck and the respect that came with being a soldier's wife. But Cole had been deployed more than he'd been home, and Diana quickly grew tired of the lonely nights and military wives' social circles. She wanted more excitement, more money, more attention. Rick Dalton provided all 3. Rick was everything Cole wasn't: wealthy, available, and smooth-talking. He owned 3 successful car dealerships across town and lived in a mansion on the hill. At 35, he'd never been married, preferring to play the field until Diana caught his eye at a charity gala 2 years ago. He'd pursued her relentlessly, and she'd finally given in 6 months after Cole's last deployment. What started as an affair had evolved into something deeper, or at least, what Diana convinced herself was deeper. Rick showered her with gifts, took her to expensive restaurants, and promised her a life of luxury once she divorced Cole. He'd even hinted at marriage, though he'd never officially proposed. The truth was, Rick saw Diana as a conquest rather than a life partner. He enjoyed stealing another man's wife, especially a soldier's wife. It felt like winning to him. But Diana didn't know about Rick's gambling debts or his connections to some very dangerous people who were growing impatient with his promises to pay up. Diana's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Beth. Any word on Cole? She ignored it. Beth had always been suspicious of her relationship with Rick, warning Diana that she was making a mistake. But Beth was jealous. She'd married a plumber and lived in a modest apartment across town while Diana was about to inherit a house and move up to Rick's mansion. Diana had already consulted with a divorce attorney, Lawrence Park, who'd outlined her options. Since Cole was listed as MIA, she could eventually have him declared dead and inherit everything. Or if he returned, she could file for divorce and claim abandonment, arguing that his military service had destroyed their marriage. Either way, she'd walk away with at least half of everything, plus his military benefits. What Diana didn't know was that Cole had returned that morning. She'd spent the day at Rick's house, planning their future while her husband discovered their betrayal. She also didn't know that Rick's financial troubles ran deeper than unpaid gambling debts. He'd been laundering money for a criminal organization, and his latest scheme involved using Diana's upcoming divorce settlement to pay off his debts. As Diana prepared for another evening with Rick, she felt confident about her future. She'd played the grieving military wife perfectly, gaining sympathy from neighbors and friends while secretly building a new life with Rick. She had no idea that Cole Morrison was not the same man who'd left for deployment. Captivity had stripped away any softness he'd once possessed, leaving behind something harder and infinitely more dangerous. The game Diana thought she was winning had already changed rules, and she was no longer playing against the naive soldier who'd married her 4 years ago. Chapter 3: The Ghost Returns. Cole spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, planning. He'd called his commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, and explained his situation. Hayes, a gruff career soldier who'd served 3 tours in Iraq, listened without judgment. "How do you want to handle this, Morrison?" Hayes asked. "I need time, sir. And I need some favors. You've got both. You've earned them. What do you need?" Cole outlined his initial plan. Hayes made some calls, and by morning, Cole had a new identity for his reconnaissance mission. Officially, he was still undergoing debriefing and medical evaluation at a military facility 3 states away. Unofficially, he was free to move around town as a ghost. That evening, Cole returned to his house. He'd watch from across the street as Diana left around 6 p.m., dressed to kill and driving toward the wealthy part of town. He waited another hour before using his key. The house felt foreign now, tainted. Diana had redecorated while he was gone, replacing his photographs with abstract art and modern furniture. His military commendations had been moved to a closet. It was as if she'd already erased him from her life. Cole found what he was looking for in Diana's study: financial documents, phone records, and most importantly, her laptop. 20 years in military intelligence had taught him a few things about computers. Within an hour, he'd installed monitoring software that would track every email, text, and phone call Diana made. But the real treasure was Diana's diary, hidden behind some books. She'd always been old-fashioned about some things, preferring pen and paper for her most private thoughts. Cole read 3 months' worth of entries, his expression growing darker with each page. "Rick says he'll leave his wife for me, but he's not married. Why does he lie about small things? Sometimes I wonder if I can trust him, but then he takes me somewhere expensive and I forget my doubts." Cole's unit was ambushed again. Part of me hopes, no, I can't write that down, but it would solve so many problems. Rick owes money to some scary people. He showed me pictures of what they do to people who don't pay. I told him he should be more careful, but he just laughed and said he had a plan. Saw Lawrence Park today. He says I could get $300,000 from Cole's life insurance if he's declared dead. Rick says that would be enough to solve all our problems. The entries painted a clear picture. Diana wasn't just cheating. She was hoping for Cole's death and actively planning to profit from it. Rick wasn't just stealing another man's wife. He was using her to solve his financial problems with dangerous criminals. Cole closed the diary and smiled for the first time since his return. It wasn't a pleasant smile. He spent the next 2 hours planting surveillance devices throughout the house. Cameras and microphones so small, they were virtually undetectable. Then he hacked into Diana's phone remotely, gaining access to all her communications with Rick. By midnight, Cole had a complete picture of his enemies. Diana was driven by greed and selfishness, but she was essentially weak. Rick was the real threat, manipulative, connected to criminals, and willing to hurt people to get what he wanted. Both of them had underestimated the man they were betraying. Cole returned to his motel and began planning phase 2. His military training had taught him that the best operations were surgically precise, identify the target's weaknesses, exploit them systematically, and strike when they least expected it. Diana and Rick thought they were playing a simple game of adultery and divorce. They had no idea they'd targeted a man who'd survived 8 months of psychological torture by learning to think 10 steps ahead of his enemies. They'd made 2 crucial mistakes. They'd underestimated their opponent, and they'd left evidence of their crimes in writing. Cole opened his laptop and began typing a detailed operational plan. By the time he was finished, dawn was breaking over the motel parking lot, and Diana Morrison had less than a week of freedom left. Chapter 4: Intelligence Gathering. Cole's surveillance network paid dividends immediately. Over the next 3 days, he monitored every conversation Diana had with Rick, her lawyer, and her friends. The audio quality was crystal clear, and the hidden cameras provided visual confirmation of everything he suspected. Thursday evening brought the most revealing conversation yet. Diana was at Rick's mansion, a gaudy McMansion on Pinnacle Drive with marble columns and gold fixtures that screamed new money. Cole watched through the hidden camera in Diana's purse as Rick paced nervously around his living room, whiskey in hand. They're getting impatient, Diana. They want their money by next week, or things get ugly. Who exactly are they? Diana asked, though Cole could see she was frightened. People you don't want to meet. Look, I borrowed money to expand the dealerships, but the car market tanked. I was supposed to pay them back 6 months ago. How much? $200,000. Diana went pale. Rick, that's more than Cole's life insurance. No, it's not. You said he had a $400,000 policy through the military. Cole made a note. Diana had been lying to Rick about the insurance amounts, probably skimming some for herself. Even in their criminal partnership, she was planning to cheat her partner. The military is investigating the ambush, Diana said. They might find Cole alive. Rick's expression darkened. Then we need to make sure they don't. Cole's blood ran cold as Rick continued. I know people who can arrange accidents. Military investigations can be compromised. You're talking about murder, Diana whispered. I'm talking about survival. These people I owe money to, they don't just break legs. They make examples. I've seen photos of what they did to the last guy who couldn't pay. Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would you need me to do? Cole had heard enough. He now had recorded evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. But he wasn't ready to involve the authorities yet. He wanted Rick and Diana to dig their hole deeper. The next morning, Cole made a phone call to an old Army buddy, Sergeant Major Tom Rodriguez, who now worked private security. Tom, I need a favor. Remember those investigation skills we learned in intelligence? Of course I do. What's the situation? Cole explained about Rick's criminal connections. I need to know who he owes money to and what kind of timeline we're looking at. Tom worked fast. By afternoon, he'd called back with disturbing news. Your boy Rick is in deep with the Kozlov organization. Eastern European outfit, runs drugs and money laundering through legitimate businesses. Viktor Kozlov doesn't forgive debts, and Rick's been dodging him for months. How do you know all this? Because Kozlov's been on FBI radar for 2 years. I've got a contact at the bureau, Agent Linda Hayes. She's Colonel Hayes' daughter, by the way. She's been building a case against Kozlov, but they need more evidence. Cole smiled grimly. What kind of evidence? Financial records, recorded conversations, anything proving money laundering through legitimate businesses like, say, car dealerships. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Cole thanked Tom and hung up, then spent the evening reviewing everything he'd recorded. Rick's conversations weren't just about debt. They included detailed discussions about moving money through his dealership books, falsifying sales records, and paying Kozlov's organization through fake transactions. Cole had enough evidence to destroy Rick's business and send him to prison. But he wanted more. He wanted Diana to incriminate herself completely, and he wanted Rick to suffer the way Cole had suffered in captivity, helpless, betrayed, and facing an enemy who held all the cards. Saturday morning, Cole implemented the next phase of his plan. He created an anonymous email account and sent Diana a message that would drive her deeper into Rick's criminal web. Mrs. Morrison, I represent certain parties interested in your husband's current status. We understand you may be inheriting significant assets soon. Perhaps we could meet to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements. Time is a factor. Cole watched through his hidden cameras as Diana read the email, her face cycling through confusion, fear, and finally, greed. She immediately called Rick. Someone knows about Cole, she said. They want to meet about his assets. What kind of someone? They didn't say, but they mentioned time being a factor. What if it's those people you owe money to? Rick was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe that's not a bad thing. If they're willing to wait for Cole's insurance money. Are you suggesting we make a deal with criminals? I'm suggesting we survive. Cole leaned back in his motel chair, satisfied. Diana and Rick were about to walk willingly into his trap, thinking they were negotiating with Kozlov's people for more time. Instead, they'd be confessing their crimes to a federal agent who'd been hunting Kozlov for 2 years. The game was almost over, but Cole wasn't ready for checkmate yet. He wanted to see just how far his wife and her lover would go to betray him. Chapter 5. The Trap Titans. Agent Linda Hayes sat across from Cole in a secure conference room at the FBI field office. She was in her early 30s, with sharp features and intelligent dark eyes that reminded Cole of her father, Colonel Hayes. She'd already reviewed the surveillance footage and audio recordings Cole had provided. This is exactly what we've been looking for, she said. Rick Dalton's dealerships have been on our radar as potential money laundering fronts, but we couldn't get inside. Your evidence gives us probable cause for warrants. I want to take this further, Cole said. My wife and her lover are planning to have me killed. I want them to confess to everything on record. Agent Hayes studied him carefully. What did you have in mind? Cole outlined his plan. It was elaborate, dangerous, and completely illegal by normal law enforcement standards. But Agent Hayes had been hunting the Kozlov organization for 2 years without success, and Cole's personal vendetta happened to align perfectly with federal interests. You understand that if this goes wrong, you could be killed? She asked. I've been dead before. It didn't take. They spent 3 hours planning the operation. Agent Hayes would pose as a representative of the Kozlov organization, meeting with Diana and Rick to discuss their debt situation. Cole would be nearby, recording everything, while a full FBI surveillance team monitored from concealed positions. The meeting was set for Wednesday evening at an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of town, a location that would make Diana and Rick nervous enough to reveal their true intentions while giving the FBI team multiple vantage points for surveillance. Monday morning, Cole sent another anonymous email to Diana. Mrs. Morrison, your cooperation is appreciated. Wednesday, 8 p.m., Warehouse District, 1247, Industrial Boulevard. Come alone with your partner. Bring documentation of all assets. This is not optional of our timeline. Cole watched through his surveillance system as Diana and Rick panicked. They spent Monday afternoon destroying evidence, transferring money between accounts, and making increasingly desperate phone calls to contacts who might help them disappear if things went wrong. But they also did something Cole hadn't expected. They began planning to eliminate him permanently. Tuesday evening, Cole listened from his motel room as Rick made a phone call to someone named Eddie. I need a favor, Eddie. Remember that thing we discussed about making problems disappear? What kind of problem? Military guy. Might be coming back from overseas soon. Needs to have an accident before he can cause trouble. That's not my usual thing, Rick. I'll pay $50,000. When? After I collect on his life insurance. Eddie agreed to meet Wednesday morning to discuss details. Cole realized with cold satisfaction that Rick was trying to hire a hitman while simultaneously planning to confess his money laundering activities to federal agents. The man was even stupider than Diana. Wednesday afternoon, Cole positioned himself in an abandoned building across from the warehouse, equipped with military-grade surveillance equipment Tom Rodriguez had provided. Agent Hayes and her team were already in position, with cameras and microphones throughout the warehouse. At exactly 8 p.m., Diana and Rick arrived in Rick's Mercedes. They looked terrified but determined, carrying a briefcase full of financial documents and a laptop with detailed records of Rick's money laundering operations. Agent Hayes met them at the warehouse entrance, dressed in an expensive suit and projecting an aura of quiet menace that Cole recognized from his own military training. She led them inside to a table illuminated by a single overhead light. You're in debt to my organization, she began without preamble. We're here to discuss repayment terms. How much do you know? Rick asked nervously. We know about the car dealerships. We know about the fake sales records. We know about your wife's insurance policy. She's not my wife, Diana interjected. Her husband is missing in action. Probably dead. Probably isn't certainty. We need certainty. Rick leaned forward. What if we could guarantee certainty? What if the husband never came back? Agent Hayes raised an eyebrow. Are you proposing what I think you're proposing? I'm saying I have connections. People who can arrange accidents. For the right price. And what price would that be? Diana opened the briefcase. We have documentation of all his assets. Military life insurance, the house, savings accounts. Close to $500,000 total. But we need time, Rick added. And we need the husband eliminated cleanly. No investigation, no questions. Agent Hayes pretended to consider this. Our organization doesn't usually involve itself in domestic matters. But your debt is substantial, and you've proven unreliable. We're not unreliable, Diana protested. I've been planning this for months. I even have documentation showing he abandoned the marriage by choosing military service over family responsibilities. Cole's jaw tightened as he listened to his wife's betrayal laid out in cold detail. Show me, Agent Hayes demanded. Diana opened her laptop and began displaying forged documents, fake correspondence, and falsified financial records designed to make Cole look like an abusive husband who'd abandoned his family. She'd been preparing her victim narrative while simultaneously planning his murder. This is very thorough, Agent Hayes said. But killing him is still risky. What if there's an investigation? Rick smiled coldly. That's already handled. I have contacts in the military investigation unit. For $50,000, they'll make sure any questions about his death go away quietly. Agent Hayes had heard enough. She gave an almost imperceptible hand signal, and FBI agents emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. FBI, you're under arrest. Diana's scream echoed through the warehouse as she realized they'd walked into a trap. Rick tried to run but was tackled before he reached the door. Cole watched from his hiding place as the woman he'd married and the man she'd chosen to replace him were handcuffed and read their rights. But this was just the beginning of their punishment. The real reckoning was yet to come. Chapter 6, Legal Warfare. The arrests of Diana Morrison and Rick Dalton sent shockwaves through their social circles, but Cole remained officially dead to the world. The FBI had agreed to keep his involvement classified while they built their broader case against the Kozlov organization using Rick's money laundering evidence. Cole spent Thursday morning in Agent Hayes' office, reviewing the charges being filed against his wife and her lover. The list was impressive: conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. Rick's looking at 25 to life if convicted on all counts, Agent Hayes explained. Diana's facing 15 to 20. But they'll probably try to make deals. What kind of deals? Information about Rick's criminal connections in exchange for reduced sentences. Diana might try to claim she was coerced or manipulated. Cole's expression hardened. Diana wasn't manipulated. She was the architect of this plan. Agent Hayes nodded. The recordings prove that. But juries sometimes sympathize with women who claim they were led astray by criminal boyfriends. Then we need to make sure she can't play the victim card. That afternoon, Cole visited Diana's lawyer, Lawrence Park, at his downtown office. Park was a slick divorce attorney who specialized in helping wealthy women extract maximum settlements from their husbands. He had no idea that the missing Cole Morrison was sitting in his waiting room. Cole introduced himself using a fake name and claimed to be an investigative journalist researching military spouse fraud cases. Park, eager for publicity, talked freely about Diana's case, revealing that she'd been planning to declare Cole dead and collect his insurance money even before his unit was ambushed. She came to me 8 months ago, Park bragged. Said her husband was deployed constantly and she wanted to divorce, but the timing was bad financially. I advised her to wait for a more advantageous situation. What kind of situation? Well, hypothetically, if something happened to him overseas, she'd inherit everything without the messy complications of divorce proceedings. Cole kept his expression neutral as Park essentially confessed to helping Diana plan insurance fraud. He recorded every word. Friday brought another revelation when Cole monitored a jailhouse phone call between Diana and her sister Beth. The conversation was illuminating and damning. Beth, you have to help me, Diana pleaded. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Diana, they have you on tape planning to murder Cole. It wasn't serious. Rick was just talking. I never actually wanted Cole hurt. Then why did you file those bigamy charges? Cole sat up straighter. He hadn't heard about bigamy charges. I had to do something, Diana continued. When Cole didn't come back with his unit, I panicked. If he was alive and returned home, he'd ruin everything with Rick. So I filed charges claiming he'd married someone overseas while he was captured. That's insane, Diana. Even if it were true, I had documents. Rick helped me create marriage certificates showing Cole married some Afghan woman. We were going to claim he was a bigamist and get him deported or arrested when he returned. Cole closed his eyes, feeling a mix of rage and cold satisfaction. Diana had been even more thorough in her betrayal than he'd realized. She hadn't just planned to steal his assets and have him killed. She'd also planned to destroy his reputation and freedom if he somehow survived. The FBI says they have recordings of you planning all this, Beth said. They tricked us. They pretended to be criminals and led us into saying things we didn't mean. Diana, listen to yourself. You planned to have your husband murdered for insurance money. There's no spinning that. Diana's voice turned cold. Cole was never coming back anyway. His unit was decimated. I was just being practical about the reality of the situation. You're sick, Beth said, and hung up. Cole saved the recording and added it to his growing evidence file. Diana had just confessed to insurance fraud, document forgery, and filing false charges against him. More importantly, she'd revealed her complete lack of remorse or humanity. Saturday evening, Cole received a call from Tom Rodriguez with disturbing news. Your buddy Rick made bail, Tom said. $500,000, posted by some shell company. FBI thinks it might be connected to Kozlov's organization. They let him out. Federal judge bought the argument that he was just a small-time money launderer, not a flight risk. Diana's still in custody because of the murder conspiracy charges, but Rick's walking around free until trial. Cole felt a familiar cold fury building. The legal system was failing, just as it had failed so many times during his military service. Sometimes justice required more direct action. Tom, remember those private security contacts you mentioned? Yeah, why? I think Rick Dalton needs to understand that some debts can't be discharged in bankruptcy court. That night, Cole began planning the final phase of his revenge. Diana would face justice in the courtroom, but Rick had earned something more personal. Something that would ensure he never again betrayed a soldier who was fighting for his country. The legal system had given Rick Dalton a second chance. Cole Morrison would make sure he didn't get a third. Chapter 7. The Courtroom Gambit. 2 weeks later, Cole sat in the back of the federal courthouse, wearing civilian clothes and dark sunglasses, watching as Diana's preliminary hearing began. Officially, he was still undergoing military debriefing at a classified location. Unofficially, he was about to make his dramatic return from the dead. Diana had been denied bail due to the severity of the murder conspiracy charges, and the weeks in federal custody had taken their toll. Her perfectly styled hair was unkempt, her designer clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit, and her green eyes showed the haunted look of someone whose world had collapsed completely. Her new attorney, Marcus Webb, was a high-priced criminal defense lawyer who specialized in impossible cases. He'd crafted a defense strategy around Diana being manipulated by Rick Dalton and suffering from emotional distress due to her husband's presumed death. Your Honor, Webb argued, my client is a grieving military spouse who was manipulated by a career criminal. She never intended for anyone to be harmed. She was simply trying to protect herself financially during an incredibly difficult period. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Morgan stood to respond. She was a tough prosecutor with a perfect record in organized crime cases, and she wasn't buying Diana's victim act. Your Honor, the defendant wasn't grieving. She was celebrating. Our surveillance footage shows her laughing about her husband's presumed death and actively planning to profit from it. This wasn't emotional distress, it was calculated greed. Webb continued his performance. My client believed her husband had abandoned their marriage by choosing constant military deployment over family responsibilities. She felt she had no choice but to protect her future. By planning his murder? Morgan shot back. By planning for the reality that he might not return from a dangerous deployment. The defendant never actually took any steps to harm her husband. Morgan smiled coldly. Actually, Your Honor, she did take steps. She filed false bigamy charges against Staff Sergeant Morrison just last week, claiming he'd married multiple women overseas while being held as a prisoner of war. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, frowned. Bigamy charges? I wasn't aware of additional charges. Because they're fabricated, Your Honor, Morgan explained. The defendant created fake marriage certificates and filed false police reports claiming her husband was a polygamist who'd abandoned his American family for foreign wives. Cole watched as Diana's face went pale. The bigamy gambit had been her backup plan in case he returned alive, but it was now being used as evidence of her malicious intent. Your Honor, Webb protested. Those charges were filed in good faith based on information my client received. From her co-conspirator Rick Dalton, who created the forged documents, Morgan interrupted. We have recorded conversations of them discussing the fabrication process. Judge Williams looked stern. Mr. Webb, your client doesn't sound like a grieving widow. She sounds like someone who was actively working to destroy her husband's life and reputation. Your Honor, if I may. Webb was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the courtroom. The doors burst open, and Agent Hayes strode in with two other federal agents. Your Honor, Agent Hayes announced. We need to speak with Mrs. Morrison about her connections with certain contacts who are now in federal custody. Diana turned pale as Agent Hayes continued. We've arrested Eddie Torino, the hitman Rick Dalton hired to eliminate Staff Sergeant Morrison. Mr. Torino has provided detailed testimony about the defendant's direct involvement in planning her husband's murder. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Webb tried to object, but Judge Williams called for order. Agent Hayes, this is highly irregular. I apologize, Your Honor, but we've just apprehended the individual who was hired to carry out the planned killing. He's confessed to the entire conspiracy and implicated Mrs. Morrison as a co-conspirator who provided detailed information about her husband's habits and schedule. Cole watched as Diana's carefully constructed defense crumbled in real time. Her face had gone from pale to ashen, and she was whispering frantically to Webb. Your Honor, Morgan said. In light of this new evidence and testimony, the prosecution requests that Mrs. Morrison be held without bail pending trial on additional charges of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. Webb tried desperately to salvage the situation. Your Honor, my client has been manipulated by career criminals. Mr. Webb, Judge Williams interrupted. Your client appears to have been the one doing the manipulating. Based on the evidence presented today, including the fabricated bigamy charges and now testimony from a hired killer, it's clear that Mrs. Morrison was not a victim but an active participant in a complex criminal conspiracy. Cole stood up in the back of the courtroom. It was time for his dramatic entrance. Your Honor, he said in a clear, strong voice that carried across the silent courtroom, if I may address the court. Every head in the room turned toward him. Diana's eyes went wide with recognition and terror. I am Staff Sergeant Cole Morrison, United States Army. I've been officially declared missing in action, but as you can see, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Diana screamed and tried to lunge toward Cole before being restrained by bailiffs. Webb looked like he'd seen a ghost, while Morgan smiled with satisfaction. Judge Williams banged her gavel for order. Staff Sergeant Morrison, I presume you have something to add to these proceedings? Cole walked down the aisle, his military bearing evident in every step. He stopped directly in front of Diana, looking down at the woman who'd tried to have him killed. Your Honor, I've spent the last month listening to my wife plan my murder while I was being held as a prisoner of war. I've heard her laugh about my presumed death, forge documents to destroy my reputation, and actively participate in hiring someone to ensure I never returned home alive. Diana was sobbing hysterically now, her victim narrative completely destroyed by Cole's living presence. She's not a grieving widow, Cole continued. She's a calculating criminal who saw my military service as an opportunity for personal profit. And she's not done yet. Chapter 8, The Reckoning Revealed. Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Your Honor, I have evidence that this conspiracy goes deeper than just insurance fraud and attempted murder. Judge Williams looked intrigued. Proceed, Staff Sergeant. During my month of investigation, I discovered that my wife and her co-conspirator Rick Dalton have been using my military status and presumed death to defraud multiple organizations. They've collected unauthorized survivor benefits, filed false claims with veteran support charities, and even established a fake memorial fund in my name. Morgan stepped forward. Your Honor, the prosecution was not aware of these additional crimes. Because they're not federal crimes, Cole explained. They're military crimes that fall under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. My commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, is prepared to file charges for fraudulent enlistment, theft of military property, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Diana's lawyer tried to object, but Cole wasn't finished. More importantly, Your Honor, this conspiracy has endangered active military operations. The fake bigamy charges Diana filed claimed that I had married civilians in Afghanistan and revealed classified information about our unit's activities and locations to unauthorized individuals. Agent Hayes stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Morrison is correct, Your Honor. Mrs. Morrison's false claims have compromised ongoing military intelligence operations and potentially endangered American soldiers still deployed in the region. Judge Williams looked stunned. Mr. Webb, your client has moved beyond simple insurance fraud into potential treason. Webb was sweating profusely. Your Honor, my client couldn't have known. She knew exactly what she was doing. Cole interrupted. Diana has been documenting her plans in detail for months. She kept a diary outlining every step of the conspiracy, including her hope that I would be killed in action to make her fraud easier to execute. Cole handed the diary to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Williams. The judge read several entries, her expression growing darker with each page. Mrs. Morrison, Judge Williams said coldly, these entries suggest that you were not just planning to profit from your husband's death, but that you were actively hoping for it. Diana finally found her voice. He left me alone. He chose the military over his family. I had every right to protect myself by hiring hitmen and filing false charges. Cole asked calmly, you were never coming back anyway. Diana screamed. Your unit was destroyed. You were listed as missing. I was just being practical. Actually, Cole said with cold satisfaction, I was being held prisoner by enemy combatants for 8 months. While I was being tortured for information about American military operations, you were planning to profit from my suffering. The courtroom was deadly silent. But the best part, Cole continued, is that Rick Dalton has been recording your conversations for months, planning to blackmail you after you collected the insurance money. Diana went pale. That's not true. Agent Hayes held up a tablet computer. Actually, Mrs. Morrison, it is true. We found dozens of recordings on Mr. Dalton's devices. He was planning to extort money from you by threatening to expose your fraud unless you gave him 70% of the settlement. Cole smiled without humor. Even your co-conspirator was betraying you, Diana. You were never partners. You were just his mark. Diana began sobbing uncontrollably as the full scope of her situation became clear. She'd lost everything. Her freedom, her assets, her reputation, and even the illusion that Rick had loved her. Your Honor, Morgan said, based on this new evidence, the prosecution recommends that Mrs. Morrison be held without bail pending trial on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, filing false reports, fraudulent use of military benefits, and providing false information in a federal investigation. Judge Williams nodded grimly. Mr. Webb, does your client wish to make a statement? Diana looked up at Cole with pure hatred in her eyes. You should have died over there. You should have died and left me alone. Cole's expression didn't change. Diana, I did die over there. The man you married, the man who would have forgiven you, who would have tried to work things out, he didn't survive captivity. What came back is someone else entirely. Someone who never forgives and never forgets. He leaned closer to her. And someone who's going to make sure you spend the next 20 years thinking about what you've done. Judge Williams banged her gavel. Mrs. Morrison, you are remanded to federal custody without bail pending trial. Mr. Webb, I suggest you prepare your client for the reality that she's facing life in prison. As Diana was led away in handcuffs, still screaming and sobbing, Cole felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Phase 1 of his revenge was complete. Diana would never again hurt anyone the way she'd hurt him. But Rick Dalton was still walking free on bail, and Cole's justice was far from finished. Chapter 9, Final Justice. 3 days after Diana's arraignment, Cole received a call from Tom Rodriguez with troubling news. Rick's trying to skip town, Tom reported. FBI surveillance lost him last night. They think he's headed for the Canadian border with a fake passport and about $200,000 in cash. Cole wasn't surprised. Rick had always been a coward who preferred manipulation to confrontation. But Cole had anticipated this possibility. Where do you think he's going? Toronto, probably. He's got connections there from his card dealing days. But Cole, there's something else. Remember that hitman Eddie he hired? Eddie made bail too, and he's disappeared. Cole felt a familiar cold focus settle over him. You think they're working together? Maybe. Or maybe Eddie's cutting his own deal. Either way, you've got two dangerous men with nothing left to lose and every reason to want you dead. That evening, Cole drove to the abandoned warehouse where Diana and Rick had walked into his FBI trap. But this time, he wasn't there to gather evidence or work with law enforcement. He was there to finish what his wife and her lover had started. Cole had learned during his captivity that sometimes the law wasn't enough. Sometimes justice required more direct action. He'd made peace with that reality months ago. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You cost me everything, soldier boy. Time to finish what I started. Come alone to the old Morrison place. 1 hour. Or I start hunting your friends and family. Cole smiled grimly. Rick was trying to lure him into a trap, probably with Eddie's help. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They thought they were dealing with the same naive soldier Diana had married 4 years ago. Cole drove to his house, the one Diana had redecorated while planning his murder. He parked a block away and approached on foot, using urban warfare tactics he'd learned in Special Forces training. The house was dark, but Cole could see two figures moving inside, positioning themselves for an ambush. Instead of walking into their trap, Cole went to his basement and retrieved items he'd hidden there during his initial reconnaissance. Military-grade surveillance equipment, night vision goggles, and other tools that weren't quite legal for civilian use, but that Tom Rodriguez had provided without asking too many questions. Cole positioned himself in the house across the street, the same one where he'd watched Diana leave for her evenings with Rick. From there, he could see Rick and Eddie positioning themselves by the front and back doors, waiting for him to walk into their crossfire. But Cole had a different plan. He called 911 from a burner phone, reporting suspicious activity at his address, possible breaking and entering by armed intruders. Then he called the FBI tip line and reported that Rick Dalton, who was supposed to surrender his passport as a condition of bail, was attempting to flee the country from this location. Finally, he called Agent Hayes directly. It's Cole. Rick and his hitman are at my house, armed and waiting to kill me. I've got them under surveillance, and local police are en route. Where are you? Safe. But Linda, make sure your people know that Rick and Eddie are armed and expecting trouble. They're not going to surrender peacefully. 20 minutes later, Cole watched through night vision scopes as police cars surrounded his house. Rick and Eddie, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, tried to escape through the backyard, but found themselves facing a SWAT team. The standoff lasted 3 hours. Rick tried to negotiate, claiming he was just retrieving personal property. Eddie, realizing he'd been played, turned on Rick and confessed to the entire murder-for-hire plot in exchange for protective custody. By dawn, both men were in custody. Rick's bail was revoked, and additional charges were filed for attempting to flee prosecution and conspiracy to commit murder. Eddie's confession provided the final piece of evidence needed to ensure Diana's conviction. 3 months later, Cole sat in the same federal courthouse where Diana had been arrested, watching as she was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Rick received 30 years, and Eddie got 15 years in exchange for his cooperation. During Diana's sentencing hearing, she was given the opportunity to make a statement. She stood up, looked directly at Cole, and spoke with the same cold calculation that had characterized her crimes. "You destroyed my life," she said. "You could have just divorced me quietly and moved on. But you had to be cruel about it." Cole stood up from the gallery. Judge Williams allowed him to respond. "Diana, I didn't destroy your life. You destroyed it when you decided that my military service was less important than your personal comfort. You destroyed it when you chose to betray the man who was fighting for your freedom. And you destroyed it when you decided that murder was preferable to honest conversation." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I spent 8 months in hell, dreaming of coming home to you. You spent those same 8 months planning to profit from my death. The difference between us is that my loyalty survived torture. Yours didn't survive boredom." Diana started to respond, But Cole continued. You asked me once why I chose the military over family. The answer is simple. I chose duty over selfishness, honor over convenience, and loyalty over betrayal. Those are choices you'll never understand, which is why you'll spend the next 25 years in a cell, thinking about the life you threw away for 30 pieces of silver. Judge Williams banged her gavel. Mr. Morrison, that's enough. Cole nodded and sat down. He'd said what needed to be said. As Diana was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at Cole one final time. The hatred in her eyes had been replaced by something else: fear, regret, and the dawning realization that she'd destroyed her life for nothing. Cole watched her disappear through the courthouse doors, feeling a cold satisfaction settle over him. The naive soldier who'd married Diana Morrison was truly dead now, killed not by enemy combatants, but by the woman who'd promised to love and honor him. What remained was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A man who'd learned that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford, and that justice sometimes required more than legal proceedings. Cole Morrison had survived 8 months of torture by enemy combatants. But it was coming home to betrayal that had truly forged him into someone new. Someone who never forgot, never forgave, and never again made the mistake of trusting anyone who hadn't earned it through blood and sacrifice. 3 years later, Cole received a letter from federal prison. Diana was requesting a divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences. Cole threw the letter away without reading it completely. Some betrayals went too deep for legal resolution. He'd gotten his justice. Diana Morrison could spend the rest of her life living with the consequences of her choices, just as he would spend the rest of his life living with the consequences of hers. In the end, they'd both gotten exactly what they deserved. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.